The years of the Tibetan Empire are long forgotten, and currently our only positive traits are our unique culture and Buddhism. Our agrarian country is one of the poorest with a backwards industry, and our conservative aristocracy is slowing down any reforms. Furthermore, our military is extremely weak. We have only managed to keep away from the Kuomintang due to British aid. But these aren't our most pressing issues. The death of our 13th Dalai Lama was followed by a political crisis, at the end of which a regent was identified. Yampel Yeshe Gyaltsen. His job is to find the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama and raise him until he can rule our country again. According to the regent's visions, the soul of the Dalai Lama went east, to the province of Amdo, formerly belonging to us. And while some of the Lhasa aristocracy are insisting that he was reincarnated in our capital, this is only a scheme to try and gain more power for themselves. The Dalai Lama's soul definitely went east, we only have to find it. The search in Amdo will significantly weaken the aristocracy, which are now powerless against the regent. Still, an opposition in the governing council and the army exists. They will immediately be eliminated to grant our regent extreme political power. With this power, and while we wait for the Dalai Lama to be found, a captain of industry was hired and the department of electrical machines was created, which will help guide our industry. In the meantime, a British mission arrived in Lhasa with the goal of creating a radio bridge to India and Britain, also promising to evaluate and aid our military against an eventual renewed threat from the Kuomintang. About 150 days later, our industrial development scheme has come a long way. Deforestation allowed us to expand the cultivation and sale of mint, one of our main exports. And the creation of a power station in Lhasa will provide us with the most important fuel for industry, electricity. These developments allowed us to expand our monaistic schools, and with the radio station to India established, we can purchase machines from them. That's when the marvelous news arrived. The reincarnation of the Dalai Lama had been found. However, the Chinese government has refused to give us the boy due to his Chinese citizenship, and any negotiations to try and free him have been in vain. The only way forward is to pay up, and soon enough the caravan was on its way to Lhasa, but we are ruined. 300,000 Chinese dollars is a lot. If we want to continue our industrial expansions, we'll have to raise taxes on our monasteries, despite the drop in stability. However, this would be raised back up with the arrival of the 14th Dalai Lama. It will take time for him to be able to rule our nation, and in the meantime the regent will continue his job. For example, setting up weaving workshops to expand our industrial and export capabilities. The regent's plan was to simply continue with reforms and industrial expansions until the Dalai Lama was old enough. However, the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War would change everything. With the Kuomintang fighting for their life in the east, we might be able to take back our lands from them. That's when a perfectly timed offer arrived from Kham. For a long time, a small resistance of Tibetans have sought to reunite the regions with us, but unsuccessfully. However, under the new leadership of Phuntsok Wangyal, a communist Tibetan, they are gaining strength. By distributing arms and simply inspiring the native Tibetans, we can help him to raise up against the local Chinese leadership. Only 35 days later, the uprising was on its way, and we immediately sent our whole army to assist it. They had already captured 2 of the 3 states as we arrived, but the local Chinese army was now mobilized and put up a strong resistance. We tried to break through their defenses to reach their capital, but failed miserably. Instead, we turned west and walked around their forces to capture both their remaining cities. However, they didn't surrender, and in the mountainous terrain it will take a long time to defeat their forces. So we decided to focus on what the British mission had told us. Sadly, we don't have the political power to fix the underlying issues of our army immediately, but we could begin to manufacture our own weapons and attract volunteers from the monks of Dobdob. We even had the time to continue and expand our support for modernization with the goal of eventually lifting Tibet out of our poor agrarian state. Finally, the Chinese forces were defeated and Phuntsok, the Red Buddhist, had taken over the area. With his success and our support to his cause, the popularity of Phuntsok and his Tibetan Communist Party has skyrocketed. And soon enough he arrived in Lhasa to hold a speech to the National Assembly of Tibet, proposing several major reforms to improve the state, and despite his leftist views he expressed his support towards the Dalai Lama and his favorable views on Buddhism. Interestingly, and a complete shock to the regent, the assembly gave him the authority to carry out his reforms. The regent now went from the most powerful man to completely powerless. The Buddhist socialists of Phuntsok have peacefully taken over and his troops in Kham joined our nation. However, before the plenty reforms can begin, we must unite our people under them. Young people have always been kinda left-leaning, so attracting their minds will be a simple and profitable goal. But our old and religious citizens will be harder to convince. Luckily, history has already shown them that Buddhism and communism are compatible. In the 1920s, some monks were punished for leaning towards socialism. This will now be encouraged and red monasteries will be founded all throughout our country, slowly but surely raising our stability. However, there is one more problem, our legitimacy. While our popularity is uncontested, remote regions are not subject to the authority of the central government. To fix this, regional administrations will be opened, finally granting our government very high legitimacy, enabling us to start our massive reforms. With the help of Uttok Tashi, a socialist economist, and a surprising help from the Soviets which sent a few engineers, we were able to start building a modern industry much faster than the regent could. However, this industry won't serve meaningless consumption like in the West. Instead, we will create a perfect blend of Buddhist and communist economics, seeking to raise the well-being of our population with minimal consumption. But economics isn't everything that has to be fixed. Our education system is mostly based upon studying theocracy, meaning we are falling behind the rest of the world. So we will create secular schools with the emphasis placed on socialist ideology and progress instead. Despite this being the clear way forward, several monasteries are forming an opposition against us, and if they manage to grow strong enough, our whole future could be jeopardized. So, by creating revolutionary cells in our country as well as in China, we can control their actions and destroy any dangerous opposition. Now, back to our economic reforms. Trade unions will be created to help our new working class, and collectivization of our small private sector will take place. There are now only 2 economic reforms left to finally fix our country. Emerging from the self-imposed isolation to expand trade as well as opening up for foreign affairs. And assisting the peasant population to once and for all lift our country out of poor agrarianism. So we have succeeded with our reforms. Our society is finally one of equality and justice. One where Buddhism and communism have lifted us out of poverty. We're now able to look outside of our border and prepare our military for any eventual conflicts. It will take time to remove the underlying issues, but while we wait for our political power to grow, we will develop our military science and continue strengthening our arms industry. But that's not all. Our civilian industry will continue to be strengthened, and infrastructure which plays a key role in army maneuvers will be upgraded. In the meantime, the first army reforms were started. The incompetent officers will be sent abroad and be retrained for some months. As they arrived back home, the speed of our reforms was accelerated. Our divisions were trained and reorganized as well as equipped with more infantry, more artillery and an engineering company. To fill our divisions with all the extra men needed, we called upon our youth to fight for the unity of Buddhism and communism. However, we also plan to add conscription instead of only relying on volunteers. After 180 days, we were finally ready to end our army reforms with one final bang: the destruction of corruption and nepotism. So our army is finally strong enough to defend our independence and maybe expand our territory if we would like to. And the voices who seek to do so grow stronger and stronger each day. Especially after the Comintern absolutely destroyed the Axis in Europe, showing the superiority of communism. So, if we play our cards right, we could be able to use their success to fuel our own victories. However, we are surrounded by strong powers. In our south, the British are allied or guaranteeing the independence of the 3 Himalayan nations. And in our east, the Chinese United Front are successfully holding off and even pushing back the Japanese despite heavy casualties. Nonetheless, our leadership are convinced that a greater socialist Tibet can be achieved and have decided to pursue it, preparing our country for war by strengthening the faith of our people in victory and training more divisions. However, before we could plan any invasions or demands, the world exploded for a third time. The Soviets had launched an invasion of the rest of Western Europe and were sweeping through France. And they were also destroying the British puppet state in Iran, putting pressure on the Raj. This could be our opportunity, with the Indian forces still fighting in Siam as well as anti-colonial sentiments rising in their mainland. They might not be capable or willing to defend their northern allies. But instead of simply invading them, which could cause outrage in India nonetheless, we will begin by offering Bhutan a referendum to join us voluntarily. With our similar cultures, we expect a successful referendum. However, they refused. But don't worry, with our army on their border we can simply invade them. So we declared war, and as expected, the British quickly withdrew their guarantee. The Bhutanese army had already been raised, but with only 2 divisions and no artillery or engineering support, they stood no chance, and after only a week or 2 we had annexed their whole country. We can now set our sight on Nepal. While we could invade them easily right now, we need to prepare thoroughly. Despite the British not intervening in our Bhutan conquest, they have still notified the Raj to prepare for war and have pledged to defend their Nepalese and Sikkim allies. This means as we attack Nepal, we will join the Third World War on the Soviet side against the British and Americans. In preparation, we have already started building supply hubs on our Indian border, and we have created a conscription to expand our army with new divisions. We have also started infiltrating the Raj to strengthen the anti-colonial sentiment in support of communism. After almost a year of preparation, the world war has turned into a stalemate, so it is our job to balance it back towards the Comintern. With our now 280,000 man big army and popularity of communism around 20% in India, we are more than ready. The situation developed extremely favorably for us, with the Nepalese already having surrendered due to most of their population joining our side. We are now the only Himalayan nation left. So it is only fitting that we announce the unification of the whole region under a new Union of Himalayan Socialist Republics. Still, the war continues. From now on, we will fight to liberate the Indian subcontinent. However, with the massive allied army having arrived in Nepal, we have no chance to liberate the rest of the country. But the allied reinforcements were only destined to Nepal, so as 12 new divisions were deployed, we planned and started an offensive towards Dhaka, where only Indian divisions guarded the front. Breaking through almost immediately and no Indian defense in depth halting us back allowed us to swiftly push to the Bay of Bengal. While 4 British divisions tried to hastily set up defenses in Dhaka, it was too late and we captured the city after only some days of fighting. With it captured, Burma is now cut off from the rest of India. But before we could utilize this weakness, the Allies launched an offensive in Nepal, forcing us to counterattack and postpone our Burmese offensive, giving the Allies enough time to capitulate Siam. So now we have to march as deep into Burma as possible before the Allied armies from Siam arrive. We started our offensive in the middle of the front where they had supply problems and managed to encircle 4 of their divisions. After that we continued trying to encircle another 4, but this time it was harder to break their line due to them having highly mobile divisions. Still, with divisions arriving from the east, we eventually managed to encircle them again. The next offensive was focused on capturing the port outside of Dhaka. We began by pushing from the center again towards the Bay of Bengal to encircle the port. As we closed in, resistance became fiercer, however we still managed to encircle it and one more tile. As we started attacking the defenders, we lost Dhaka but quickly managed to take it back as well as the port. This port is really important since the Soviets will now be able to send divisions to us. And even better news arrived from North America. The Mexicans had allied the Japanese, joining our side of the World War, and with little American divisions at home, they have captured all of Texas and reached all the way north to Montana. This means that if we can make the British desperate as well, they might be willing to sign a peace deal. And with already 10 million dead on the Allied side, not much has to be done to make this reality. So it's time to crack the Indian morale by invading Delhi. And if successful, it would show the weakness of the colonial administration, hopefully leading to a massive rebellion. 10 divisions have been designated for the offensive, which might seem like a small number, but with Comintern forces already having arrived, they will support us a lot. So let the Delhi offensive begin. With minimal Indian defenses, we could quickly break through, and any reinforcements trying to halt us were subsequently pushed back. Soon we had entered Dehradun and the airbase northeast of Delhi. That's when we broke the Indian cipher and started an offensive into the city. Although looking promising at first, the combination of low supply and difficult urban terrain completely halted our offensive. Furthermore, the Allies had started reinforcing the Indian front as well, but we didn't give up. More and more Comintern troops arriving and them even capturing Calcutta allowed us to try again. Forcing our men to attack, and as a miracle from Buddha himself, the Allied troops folded under our pressure and we entered the Indian capital. With the Raj now 50% towards capitulation, popularity of the colonial government under 50%, and stability at 39% due to us having killed their deployed army almost 3 times over, the people of India, Pakistan and Burma have finally had enough. Half the Raj army defected and joined the now open rebellion in southern and central India. Pakistani and Myanmar nationalists also rose up in their respective countries. All that is left now is to ferociously attack the colonial and allied forces to kill or kick them out of the Indian subcontinent. We started our offensive in West Bengal with the goal of reaching our Indian allies. Due to the allied armies being completely unorganized, we succeeded and even encircled some divisions on our way there. Next up, we continued south from Delhi with the goal of encircling the whole allied army in Nepal. Surprisingly, despite having supply problems, we succeeded with the biggest encirclement in history. probably more than 80 allied divisions, definitely representing more than 1 million men from all across the Commonwealth. We can now, in accordance with the Soviets, Japanese and Mexicans, propose a dialogue with the allied nations. And of course they accepted the prospect of peace. A ceasefire was declared and the long negotiations began. 6 months later, as long as it took to negotiate the Versailles Treaty, the world finally saw its new borders. In Asia we got our Himalayan states. India, Pakistan and Myanmar were all recognized as independent nations. Iran was split in two and Japan got the Philippine and Indochinese puppet state, as Siam, their ally, was liberated. In North America, Mexico was expanded to Texas, Arizona and New Mexico. And lastly, in Europe, our Comintern got all mainland states except Norway and Greece. So the Soviets are now basically the rulers of the old world. However, while we could safely demilitarize and help our Indian allies to rebuild, Greater Tibet has not yet been achieved. The birthplace of our Dalai Lama is still under Kuomintang control, and the longer it is, the more our culture in the region will be assimilated, especially as the central government in Nanjing is consolidating its rule over China. So before it's too late, we will declare war on the Kuomintang, and with the help of the Soviets as well as the communists in Yan'an and Urumqi, we will end the dictatorial rule of Chiang Kai-shek and liberate the peasants and workers of China, but most importantly save our Tibetan brothers in Amdo and Yushu. After some preparation, we crossed the border and the liberation could begin. Victory! Greater Tibet is finally achieved. Our brothers and sisters are at last free from the Kuomintang's oppression. And the same with our Chinese allies. Under the new communist government in Beijing, the proletariats of China are finally free from their chains. Now, after years of war, we can at last turn to our and our allies' economy. With most Comintern economies having stagnated, demilitarization and repairing all destruction will bring much needed growth. Thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe and hit the bell because next Friday is the beginning of something great.